you that song? It goes something like this. Oh, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, Mickey. Oh, hey, Mickey. Oh,
Tower
oh,
Records.
Mickey, so
We've
fine,
got
you're
it.
so fine. Oh, you got it. Oh, 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 yeah.
Tower Records. Once, they were a big name in the music industry, particularly music retail. As the name would imply, they started out by selling, well, records, classic vinyl, back when that was the quintessential music distribution method, and they saw pretty quick success. But now, they're gone. Why? Was it Walmart again? Well, sort of, kind of, they're partially at fault. But Tower Records also made some pretty major mistakes that they weren't able to come back from. They got a bit too aggressive when it came to their strategy, and lacked foresight in terms of how the music industry would radically shift within just a couple decades, between the late 90s and into the 2000s. I'm sure plenty of you can predict where this is going, but let's talk about it in more detail. Tower Records was initially founded all the way back in 1960 by a man named Russell Solomon. Solomon opened the first store on Broadway, not New York, Broadway in Sacramento, California, and he chose the name based off of his father's own drugstore, which shared a building as well as a name with the famous Tower Theater. It's now considered a landmark in Sacramento. It's the oldest remaining continuously running picture palace. But Tower Records was a pretty good name. It was thematic given the location, and records. They sold records. That was their big thing. He started selling musical records. The first standalone Tower Records was located at 2514 Watt Avenue in the Arden Garden Arcade area of Sacramento. From there, his business slowly began to grow, as sometimes they do. Because the thing about Tower that differentiated them from a lot of other record retail operations is the staff within Tower were, frankly, music nerds. Solomon was one of them. The style, as well as the overall atmosphere, appealed to the underground music market. People who were just really into the sounds, you know. The staff that Solomon was interested in hiring were young people who didn't necessarily have retail experience, but were avid about the West Coast folk and rock music scene, which were huge at the time. These were the kind of dudes that, even if you didn't know what you wanted, would probably be able to recommend you something that was really good, right up your alley. Because remember, this was back before the days of music videos, the internet, and even widespread television advertisements of music. The vast majority of people found new music through word of mouth. And Solomon hired the exact people who just loved to talk about music. You know the kind. Those dudes. Just chillin', just vibing to whatever the latest hot tracks are. Yeah, man, I'm looking for something a little upbeat, but, you know, chill, not too over the top. Oh yeah, man, I got just the thing for you. Here you go, give this record a shot. Are you on something? I am always on something. But trust me, the music's good. And the music was good. In this specific avenue, these guys were great. And because Solomon was effectively one of them, they were very loyal to him. Solomon distinguished himself as a pretty good boss, and he would promote from within, giving his early staff members new management positions as things started to blossom, and they opened new locations in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and they grew for nearly 40 years. Uninterrupted. They were unstoppable for a long time because they had the style, they had the flair, they had the attention. People knew they could go to Tower and get the music that they wanted, and it probably helped that they unintentionally wound up with a lot of celebrity endorsements. A lot of actors and musicians personally went out of their way to vouch for Tower Records, even without necessarily being paid for a sponsorship. And at one of the more iconic locations, located on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, a shopper might expect to actually run into one of these celebrities. Bruce Springsteen, Mick Jagger, Jack Nicholson, Ella Fitzgerald, Brian Wilson, and Elton John was known to arrive at the store every single Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. so he could purchase a boxload of brand new records. People loved Tower Records, and it probably helped that they were being spearheaded by the guy that had started it all. You may have noticed a pattern when it comes to a lot of these corporate downfall videos that when the original person who starts the operation is in charge, things go really well. And it probably is because a lot of these startups are just that, startups. While Solomon rose to be a CEO, In charge of a multinational company, he started with just a single shop, selling things on the front lines, and he never forgot where he came from. Often, things go off the rails when new people are put in charge that are probably more fresh out of business school and think they have the greatest ideas, yet they have no earthly clue what it's like to actually work on the front lines of these billion-dollar companies. As such, they tend to be completely out of touch. But one of the benefits that Tower Records always had is that Solomon was in charge from the start to the very end, and he was known to be exceedingly kind to his staff, rewarding knowledge about the music industry, as well as just genuine good work. But that, of course, only gets you so far. In business, things can go off the rails for any such reason. In this case, it had nothing to do with Solomon being a bad boss. He just got a little too excited and couldn't see the writing on the wall. During their existence, they tried to branch out into other things, though they were almost always known for their music. They even published their own music magazine known as Pulse, which ran from 1983 to December of 2002. And they did start selling things beyond just music. Things like movies, video games, books, and other collectibles were incorporated into Tower Records' business model in order to stay genuinely competitive, because they had big boxes to worry about. And both Walmart and Target would start investing in a pretty varied selection of music, meaning people didn't necessarily have to go to Tower Records to get the latest big album. And they also had to start adapting to the changing landscape in terms of what physical media people actually wanted, as well as the fall of physical media, which we'll get to. As you're probably aware, eventually records, vinyls, would become obsolete, replaced by tapes and then later compact discs, or CDs. Tower Records would eventually have to completely shift their inventory, and it was an expensive investment, but it wasn't anything they couldn't handle. The problem they had is they started a really aggressive expansion. In the 90s, Tower Records wanted to go global, and as such, they started opening outlets all around America, but also in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. They were so fast at this, they didn't really plan it super well, so many stores wound up in spots that weren't necessarily ideal, and in order to cover the cost of doing this so quickly, in 1998, they took on a $110 million loan to finance it. And this was a terrible, horrible, just the worst decision they could have made. Yes, expansion is good, but not when you can't necessarily afford it. And taking on that large a loan in 98, well, it didn't go well. Just 3 years later...
3/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to show you the back first because I'm in love with it. It's stainless steel. It's really, really durable. It's beautiful. And this is what the front of it looks like. Boom. That's iPod. I happen to have one right here in my pocket, matter of fact. There it is, right there.
The iPod would be introduced, and what followed was a sweeping shift in how people actually listened to and obtained their music. Tower Records tried to adapt, but the problem was physical media, especially with music, was starting to be phased out. People just weren't buying CDs anymore. It probably didn't help they got themselves in trouble when it came to CD sales, because I don't know if many of you remember, but in the 90s, CDs were violently expensive. That was by design, because CDs, the discs, actually are very cheap to manufacture. So why in the heck were they so expensive? Well, in 2002, Tower Records, along with Musicland and Trans World Entertainment, had to pay out a settlement to 41 states over CD price fixing. They agreed to pay a $3 million fine, because it was found that between 95 and 2000, music companies were using illegal marketing agreements, like minimum advertised pricing, to artificially inflate the price of CDs. On one hand, this was an effort to try to stay competitive with the big box outlets, but it was also, illegal, and it really only hurt the customers, because they wound up being overcharged by nearly $500 million over that time, which equated to about $5 per individual album. It was a bad look and cost them quite a bit of money, of course being into the years when they just stopped making money. They tried to get into the MP3 market by simply selling MP3 players, but those can only be marked up so much, and people don't buy nearly as many of those as they would individual albums, And Solomon really held on to the idea of physical media, even their online store, which they actually opened all the way back in '95, which means they were ahead of the curve in that regard. was only focused on the physical, because in his opinion, he thought the digital stuff was only a fad, and people would always want their entertainment, whether it be music, movies, video games, and everything else, physically, not digitally. It was Blockbuster syndrome all over again, and they never really were able to deal with the fact that they just couldn't beat prices at places like Walmart and Target. They were big box chains who could undercut the competition very easily, and they did. Tower Records filed for their first bankruptcy, Chapter 11 Protections, in 2004. They cited the heavy debt that I already mentioned because they could never pay that off, as well as growing competition from big box chains. And they also blamed internet piracy, which was rampant at the time. Honestly, it was probably more people were legitimately buying digital, not just stealing it. I mean, I'm sure stealing it didn't help, but there were plenty of other issues. They were able to get out of that first bankruptcy, but they were put in a situation where they just couldn't reorient themselves. They were mismanaged and still focused on the physical element without investing the limited money they had into the digital part of the equation. They were also placed under a lot of restrictions from their creditors, and they did try to make themselves at least a bit more appealing during this time. In 2005, for example, they introduced scan and listen stations at their stores. You may have seen these before. They allowed customers to scan CDs they were interested in buying and listen to samples of songs on that CD. It was actually quite clever and is still used in some places. And in 2006, they introduced the Tower Insider program. It was free of charge and allowed the customer to receive a membership card that could be scanned with each individual purchase, letting the customer get coupons and notification of special deals via email, you know, those blasted rewards cards that every single brand has nowadays that everyone hates because they fill up your wallet, although plenty of them are going to apps, which I think is even more annoying, because then they just take up space on your phone, and how often are you going to use that? I don't know, but in 2006, it was probably a good idea, especially for Tower Records loyalists, because they did have their share of customers that genuinely did not want to go to Walmart to buy their CDs. Even if it was cheaper, there was just something about Tower Records that was more old school, more homey. It just felt right to buy music in a place like that. As opposed to going to Walmart, where asking any of their employees about what kind of music is cool is like talking to a brick wall. Let's be fair, they're not paid for that. But with Tower, you could genuinely expect the clerks to actually have some pretty good recommendations and be able to talk about this stuff with you. It was a thing they were best at. It just wasn't something that let them last. Because on August 20th, 2006, they had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy again. Just 2 years after their first. Their plan at the time was to facilitate a purchase of the company right before the holiday shopping season, and on October 6th, they got their wish, but probably not in the way they wanted, because all of their assets would proceed to be liquidated. Great American Group won the auction, and immediately set up going out of business sales for every single Tower Records store that was still running in America. Most of the worldwide chains did close down, though a few still remain utilizing the brand, like Ireland, for example, which as of 2021 still had 2 stores. But as for American Tower Records, it was over. All the stores would shut down after selling off their remaining stock at drastically reduced prices. Something that we've talked about before. Going out of business sales, usually great for the customer, not so great for the company. Their website was still up, though it was sold separately to Cayman Inc. The original Tower Records was gone. And as for Russell Solomon, who, as I said, still ran the company right up until the end, well, he took responsibility. He blamed himself, mostly for taking that huge loan and expanding so quickly, right before the market would shift drastically. He also blamed himself for not seeing how dominant digital media was gonna be. He really genuinely believed it was only a fad, and he was wrong. People genuinely prefer to just get digital because it was easier for them, and more cost-effective. You could sell a digital file for a lot less money than buying a whole music CD. People can go on iTunes, buy a single song at a time for just 99 cents. Because some albums, you don't want the whole thing, you just want that one song. But with CDs, it was different. You had to get the whole thing, and they were more expensive by default. And now, you don't even buy one song at a time. You stream it. The market has completely changed from what it once was. But even after Towers went under, Solomon gave it one last try at 81 years old. The man had no chill. He went back to his first store location in Sacramento and planned a new store, opening under the name R5 Records, but I'm sad to say that it was a massive failure. While he was joined in the effort by several of his longtime employees, he was operating under the principle, all we need to do is the things that made Tower successful. Solomon, my homie, my main man, no, that doesn't work anymore, it's not 1960 now! They never got it off the ground, and after less than 3 years, Solomon was forced to sell it to Dimple Records, which was a local Sacramento chain. But Dimple's co-owner, John Radakovitz, greatly respected Solomon, because yes, from a business perspective, the man was too old school, but also, everyone kinda liked him. Like I said, he was a really good boss. At the time the Towers opened, he was perfect for the role, and Radakovitz wound up turning the grand opening of the new store, instead, into a retirement party for Russell Solomon. Many of Solomon's former employees attended the event, in appreciation of being given the opportunity to work with the thing they loved for so long. Solomon would pass away of what was believed to be a heart attack on March 4th, 2018. But in some regards, he kind of had the last laugh. Because yes, in the early 2000s, physical media was on the way out, and no one ever thought it would be back. But that's not exactly true, is it? For one thing, there are many flaws in the digital media format, because whenever you get digital media, whether it's through stream or whatever, you don't actually own that media. You're just kind of renting it in a way, or buying a license to experience it, as many companies will put it. It's cheaper than buying physical, sure, but you don't actually own the thing. You don't actually own the disc. And whether it be movies, music, games, or books, that kind of bothers a lot of people because they want to own the media so they can enjoy it whenever they want, and not have it systematically ripped away from them when Netflix does their next rotation, or when a game's servers are shut off. And where music is concerned, there's been an interesting resurgence in the vinyl market. A market that was long dead, now revived. Why vinyl, of all things? What's wrong with CDs or even tape? Well, the thing about vinyl, and the way it works, is that once you get something on vinyl, as long as you don't break it, it kind of lasts almost pretty much forever. Way longer than the other two. CDs suffer from disc rot over time, and tapes are pretty fragile in the grand scheme of things, and one malfunction with the player and the whole thing gets to be a tangled mess and is ruined. Vinyl doesn't have these problems, and it's very old school, retro. People like it just because of that, and many large musical artists and labels have invested in at least limited vinyl runs. As such, in November of 2020, Tower Records, not the original, but the brand, reopened the online store, with a brand new website, once again going back to their old roots and selling vinyl records. Because to many, Tower Records represents the vinyl era. It was the place to be for getting a hold of music. They even incorporated an online version of the old magazine Pulse that's updated regularly. It's pretty cool, and given the fact that there's a market for vinyl now, it definitely makes sense. And in October of 2022, a place called Tower Labs opened up in Brooklyn, New York. This would be the first physical iteration of the brand opened since 2006. But it isn't exactly a store. Tower Labs is more of a musician's think tank. As they put it, the intention of Tower Labs is for artists and bands to host personal gatherings with their community, similar to a backstage experience. In an increasingly digital world, it is imperative for artists to have a physical space where they can connect and create. As such, the Tower Labs is a creative space, and they're still looking into the possibility of maybe one day opening a flagship retail location. There's a chance Tower could come back, at least in some small way. Personally, I think going to online first is a big move, especially now that there's a market for the old vinyl stuff. Tower Records is a name that's associated with, well, records, it's right there. It's the perfect time for them to regain some footing, because who's gonna go to Walmart to purchase their vinyl? They are selling vinyl, I know. I'm not buying vinyl from Walmart. Get out of here! I would much rather go to the old hippie at Tower Records. And why? Because that man knows what a good sound is. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders, SomeDude267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord R444, iSurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Josh Johnson, Caleb Brainwaters, Perez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Stalinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Revel, Hayden DeGrow, No, Kurt Forkum, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Morris Someone Productions, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, DeRoushi, Your Mom Liked It, Windy City Rails, A Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer 78, Shimasu, Murder Drone Stall, Eric Hutton, AET Museum, NJ 1969, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Weofer, Jared Brussel, Zintac M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, The Conceptualist, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.